My name is Audrey, and I'm 57 years old. All my life, I've cleaned other people's homes with pride and purpose. Until last month, when my only son Jacob called to say I wasn't welcome at his wedding to Catherine. "A cleaning lady would embarrass us," he said coldly. For 35 years, I kept a secret from my son, a truth about who I really was before I chose this simple life. What happened the day I showed up anyway changed everything between us forever. If you're enjoying this story so far, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like and subscribe button, and stay tuned to see how a mother's love can overcome even the deepest rejection. I promise this is a journey you won't want to miss. I became a single mother at 22 when Jacob's father walked out on us without even leaving a note. Mark had been my college sweetheart, but when I got pregnant unexpectedly, he stuck around just long enough to see Jacob born before deciding fatherhood wasn't for him. One morning, I woke to find his side of the bed empty and his clothes gone from our cramped apartment closet. That first year alone with my baby boy was a blur of exhaustion, fear, and overwhelming love. I'd look down at Jacob sleeping, his tiny fingers curled around my thumb, and promise him I'd give him the world somehow. I had no idea then how difficult keeping that promise would be. I worked 3 jobs those early years: waitressing in the mornings, administrative work in the afternoons, and night shifts at a convenience store when I could find a neighbor to watch Jacob. Sleep became a luxury I rarely enjoyed. My hands grew rough and calloused. My back constantly ached, but giving up wasn't an option. Jacob deserved better than what I had. Eventually, I found reliable work cleaning houses for wealthy families in our town. The pay was better than my other jobs, and the flexible hours meant I could be there when Jacob got home from school. I took pride in my work turning chaotic homes into peaceful sanctuaries. There was something satisfying about creating order from disorder, even if it meant scrubbing other people's toilets and washing their dirty laundry. I still remember Jacob's first day of kindergarten. I'd saved for months to buy him new shoes, a backpack with dinosaurs on it, and school supplies. He looked so small and brave in his little button-up shirt, his dark hair neatly combed. "You're going to do amazing things, Jacob," I told him, kneeling to straighten his collar. "You're the smartest boy I know." And he was brilliant. His teachers noticed it immediately. How quickly he learned to read, how he could already do simple math in his head. By 2nd grade, they were talking about advanced programs and special opportunities. I worked extra jobs and longer hours to make sure he had everything he needed: books, a computer science kits, whatever might nurture that beautiful mind of his. Things changed when Jacob was in 4th grade. I'd started cleaning at his elementary school after hours to earn extra money. One day, some kids stayed late for a math club meeting and saw me emptying trash cans in their classroom. The next day, Jacob came home with tears streaming down his face. "They called you a garbage lady, Mom," he sobbed. "Tommy Lewis said we must be poor because you pick up trash." I sat him down and explained that there was dignity in all honest work. "I clean because it helps people, Jacob, and because it lets me take care of you. There's nothing shameful in that." He seemed to accept my explanation, hugging me tightly and saying he was proud of me. But something shifted that day. I noticed how he stopped inviting friends over to our small apartment. How he would walk a little ahead of me when we were out shopping, as if trying to create distance between us. As Jacob grew into his teenage years, his embarrassment about my occupation became more pronounced. He was attending one of the best public high schools in the district, mixing with kids from much wealthier families. I saved every penny I could for his college fund, often going without new clothes or small comforts for myself. When Jacob was 16, I was hired to clean the mansion of the Wilsons, one of the wealthiest families in town. Their daughter Natalie went to school with Jacob. One afternoon, Mrs. Wilson came home early while I was still cleaning. "Oh, you're Jacob Turner's mother, aren't you?" she said with surprise. Natalie mentioned him. Apparently, he's quite brilliant in their advanced placement classes. I felt a surge of pride. "Yes, that's my son." "How interesting," she replied, her eyes taking in my cleaning uniform. "He certainly doesn't seem like he comes from, well, you know." I didn't respond, just continued polishing their marble countertops until they gleamed. But her words stung more than she could know. Not because I was ashamed of my work, but because I recognized the judgment in her tone. The same judgment I was beginning to see in my own son's eyes. By his senior year of high school, Jacob had scholarships offers from several prestigious universities. I'd managed to save enough to help with expenses not covered by financial aid, though it meant I'd worked myself to the bone for years. The night he received his acceptance letter from Princeton, I surprised him with a small celebration dinner at home, his favorite lasagna and a store-bought cake with congratulations written in blue icing. "I'm so proud of you, Jacob," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "You're going to have opportunities I never had." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Thanks, Mom." Then hesitantly he added, "When I go to Princeton, maybe we could tell people you do something else, like maybe you work in office management or something." The request cut deep, but I forced a smile. "If that's what you want, honey." That night, after Jacob went to bed, I sat alone at our kitchen table and cried silently. Not just because my son was ashamed of me, but because I'd never told him the truth about who I really was, who I had been before choosing this life. I wondered if knowing would make him see me differently, or if it would only confuse him more. In August, I drove Jacob to Princeton in our aging Toyota. The campus was beautiful, all ivy-covered buildings and immaculate lawns. As we unloaded his belongings, I noticed how he tensed whenever another student and their parents walked by. He rushed through our goodbye, giving me a quick, awkward hug before essentially shooing me away. "You don't need to help me set up Mom," he insisted. "I've got it from here." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. "Call me when you're settled in, okay?" But Jacob didn't call that night or the next. Our conversations dwindled to brief text messages and occasional short calls, where he always seemed to be in a hurry to hang up. I told myself this was normal. He was establishing his independence, making new friends, adapting to college life. I continued cleaning homes and offices, adding more clients to my schedule now that I didn't need to be home for Jacob. The physical labor helped distract me from the emptiness of our apartment, from the growing distance between my son and me. Each night, I would look at his graduation photo on the mantel and wonder if I'd made the right choices all those years ago. What Jacob never knew, what I'd never told him, was that every penny I saved wasn't just for his education. It was also my way of atoning for the past, of building something honest and real after everything that had happened before he was born. The truth was a burden I carried alone, wondering if there would ever be a right time to share it. And as I watched my brilliant son pull further away from me with each passing year, I began to wonder if that time would ever come. The changes in Jacob during his college years were subtle at first. His calls home became less frequent, his visits during breaks shorter. When he did come home, he seemed restless and eager to leave again, as if our small apartment was a cage he couldn't wait to escape. I noticed new clothes, designer labels I could never afford to buy him. His speech patterns changed, adopting the cadence and vocabulary of his wealthy classmates. Even his posture was different, straighter, more confident, but also more rigid. Sometimes I barely recognized the young man sitting across from me at our kitchen table, picking at the home-cooked meals I'd prepared specially for his visits. During his sophomore year, I sent him small care packages, homemade cookies, a hand-knitted scarf, funny cards to make him smile during finals. Most went unacknowledged. When I asked if he'd received them, his responses were vague and dismissive. "Oh yeah, thanks. Been really busy with study groups." That Christmas, I saved up to buy him a nice watch. Nothing extravagant, but the best I could afford. He opened the box and barely looked at it. "Thanks, Mom," he said, setting it aside without trying it on. Later, I noticed he left it behind when he returned to school. Jacob's junior year, I decided to surprise him for his birthday. I took a rare day off work, baked his favorite chocolate cake, and drove the 3 hours to Princeton. I'd called his roommate beforehand to make sure Jacob would be there, and the young man had assured me Jacob would be studying in their dorm room that afternoon. When I knocked on his door, cake box in hand, the look that crossed my son's face wasn't joy. It was pure mortification. He had friends over, 3 young men and 2 women, all dressed in expensive casual wear that probably cost more than my monthly rent. "Mom," he said, his voice tight. "What are you doing here?" "Happy birthday, honey. I brought your favorite cake." An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Jacob stepped into the hallway, pulling the door mostly closed behind him. "You should have called," he hissed, his cheeks flushed with embarrassment. "I wanted to surprise you," I said, my smile faltering. "Well, it's not a good time. I'm studying with friends for a really important exam." I glanced at the door. Through the narrow opening, I could see red plastic cups and what looked like a bottle of vodka on a desk. This wasn't a study session. "I drove 3 hours, Jacob. I just thought we could celebrate your birthday together for a little while." His expression hardened. "I have plans tonight, Mom, with my friends." "I understand," I said quietly, though my heart was breaking. "At least take the cake." He accepted the box reluctantly. "Thanks. I should get back." "Aren't you going to introduce me to your friends?" I asked. Jacob's jaw tightened. "They're really busy. Another time, okay?" I nodded, fighting back tears. "Sure, honey. Another time." I drove the 3 hours back home that evening, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white. When I arrived at our empty apartment, I curled up on Jacob's old bed and finally let myself cry. The following summer, Jacob informed me he wouldn't be coming home. He'd accepted an internship at a prestigious financial firm in New York City. It was an amazing opportunity, he explained over the phone, one that could set him up for a job after graduation. I congratulated him, genuinely proud of his accomplishment, even as I mourned another 3 months without seeing my son. His senior year brought more changes. Jacob rarely called, and when he did, his conversations were perfunctory. He mentioned interviewing with top financial firms, attending networking events, making connections with influential alumni. The Jacob I had raised, sensitive, thoughtful kind, seemed to be disappearing behind a facade of ambition and social climbing. When he graduated with honors, I sat alone in the audience clapping until my hands hurt as he walked across the stage. Afterward, I searched for him among the sea of black gowns and mortarboards, finally spotting him taking photos with a group of friends and their families. I approached hesitantly, waiting for him to notice me. When he finally did, he broke away from the group with obvious reluctance. "Congratulations, Jacob, I'm so proud of you," I said, hugging him tightly. He patted my back awkwardly. "Thanks for coming, Mom." I pulled back, smiling up at him. "I wouldn't have missed it for the world." Jacob glanced over his shoulder at his waiting friends. "We're heading to a celebration lunch at the Peacock Inn. It's kind of just for graduates and their roommates." The message was clear. I wasn't invited. I swallowed my hurt and nodded. "Of course. You go have fun. Maybe we can have dinner together before I drive back." "Actually, we have the senior gala tonight, and then Tom's parents rented a house for the weekend, so—" He trailed off, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's okay," I said, though it wasn't. "We'll celebrate another time." Later that summer, Jacob called with news. He'd accepted a position at Goldman Sachs in their Manhattan office. His starting salary was more money than I'd ever made in a year. "That's wonderful, Jacob," I said, genuinely happy for his success. "And I met someone, Mom," he added. "Her name is Catherine Blackwell." The way he said her name, with a mixture of pride and reverence, told me this wasn't just any girlfriend. The Blackwells, I would soon learn, were old money New York. Banking real estate philanthropic foundations. Their name appeared on buildings throughout the city. 6 months later, I finally met Catherine at a restaurant Jacob selected in Manhattan. She was beautiful in a polished, sophisticated way. Sleek, dark hair, expensive jewelry, impeccable manners. She shook my hand with a practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. "Jacob has told me all about you," she said, though her tone suggested he hadn't told her much at all. Throughout dinner, I noticed how Jacob seemed hyper-aware of every word I spoke, tensing whenever I mentioned my work or our modest life before his success. Catherine asked polite questions about my domestic services business, as she called it, in a tone one might use when inquiring about an exotic pet. "It must be so rewarding to help busy professionals maintain their homes," she said, cutting her filet mignon into precise bites. "Do you have many employees?" "It's just me," I replied honestly. "I prefer the personal touch." Jacob quickly changed the subject, launching into a story about their recent weekend in the Hamptons with her family. I sat quietly, feeling increasingly out of place as they discussed people and places I would never know. As Catherine excused herself to the restroom, Jacob leaned across the table. "Could you maybe not talk so much about your cleaning work?" he whispered urgently. "Catherine's family is very status conscious." I stared at my son, this stranger in an expensive suit, who once fell asleep in my arms every night. "I'm not ashamed of how I've supported us, Jacob." "I know, Mom," he said impatiently, "but some things are better left unemphasized." In that moment, I almost told him everything, about who I had been, the choices I'd made, why I cleaned houses for a living when I could have done something else. But Catherine returned, and the moment passed, leaving me wondering if there would ever be a right time to reveal the truth. Over the next year, my contact with Jacob became even more limited. I met Catherine's parents exactly once at an uncomfortable brunch where Mrs. Blackwell spent most of the time discussing their family's summer home in the south of France, while Mr. Blackwell checked his phone and occasionally asked Jacob questions about market trends. Neither of them addressed me directly more than twice, and when they did, their smiles were as cold as their eyes. Then came Catherine, draped in diamonds that had once belonged to her grandmother, showing off her massive engagement ring at every opportunity. It was during this brunch that I truly understood how far Jacob had traveled from our little apartment, from the values I thought I'd instilled in him. He had become someone else entirely. Someone who laughed at Mr. Blackwell's tasteless jokes, who nodded eagerly when Mrs. Blackwell complained about the help being unreliable. As we left the restaurant, Catherine's mother clasped my hands in hers, her grip surprisingly firm. "We're so looking forward to blending our families," she said, though her tone suggested quite the opposite. "I do hope you'll be comfortable at the wedding. It will be quite elaborate." I nodded, forcing a smile. "I'm just happy to see Jacob happy." Later, as I waited for my train back home, Jacob stood awkwardly beside me on the platform. "Catherine's parents are covering most of the wedding," he said, not quite meeting my eyes. "It's going to be at their estate in Greenwich. Very formal." "I'll find something nice to wear," I promised. Jacob nodded, checking his watch. "I should get back. Catherine and I have dinner plans with some colleagues." He gave me a quick, obligatory hug before walking away, not once looking back. I watched his retreating figure, my son who had become a stranger in a world I would never belong to. What I didn't know then was just how far he would go to keep me separate from that world. 6 months before the wedding, Jacob called to give me the date. It would be held on the first Saturday in June at the Blackwells' Greenwich estate. Over 500 guests would attend, including partners from his firm, Catherine's extended family, and various business associates and social connections of the Blackwells. "It sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely happy that my son would have such a beautiful wedding. "Should I help with anything?" There was a pause. No, Catherine's mother has a wedding planner handling everything. Of course, I said, trying to mask my disappointment. I'd always imagined being involved in my only child's wedding preparations. Well, I should start looking for a dress. What colors are the wedding party wearing? Another pause longer this time. About that, Mom. We need to discuss the arrangements. Something in his tone made my stomach clench. What arrangements? The wedding is going to be very high profile. Some of Catherine's family friends are quite prominent. There might be press coverage. Okay, I said slowly, not understanding where he was going with this. Catherine's parents have been very generous, covering almost all the expenses. They're particular about how things should be done. I waited, a sense of dread growing. They've organized the seating very carefully. Important business connections, family alliances, that sort of thing. Jacob, I said firmly. What are you trying to tell me? He exhaled sharply. They've expressed concerns about your presence at the wedding. The words hit me like a physical blow. My presence? I'm your mother. I know, Mom, but they're worried about appearances. Questions about your background, your work. They don't want anything to distract from Catherine's perfect day. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you saying they don't want me at your wedding because I clean houses for a living? It's complicated, Jacob said, his voice taking on that patronizing tone he'd developed in recent years. The Blackwells move in very elite circles. Everyone will be asking questions, making connections. If people found out my mother is a cleaning lady. A cleaning lady. I repeated the words, bitter on my tongue. That's all I am to you now. That's not what I meant. He backpedaled. It's just, it could be uncomfortable for everyone. Maybe it's better if we celebrate separately, before or after. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone. Let me make sure I understand, Jacob. You're uninviting me from your wedding because you're ashamed of me. Because the woman who raised you alone, who worked multiple jobs to put you through school, who has loved you unconditionally your entire life, might embarrass you in front of your rich new family. Mom, please try to understand. This isn't just about me. It's about my future with Catherine, my career prospects, the connections I'm building. No, I said, my voice breaking. This is about a boy who has forgotten where he came from, who values status and appearances more than the people who truly love him. That's not fair, Jacob protested. Not fair. I laughed, a hollow sound. What's not fair is spending 35 years of my life putting you first, only to be told I'm not good enough to watch you get married. Mom, I have to go, I said, unable to continue the conversation without breaking down completely. Congratulations on your wedding. I hope the Blackwells' important business connections enjoy the celebration. I hung up before he could respond, then sank to the floor of my kitchen phone, still clutched in my hand. For hours I sat there replaying every moment of Jacob's childhood, wondering where I had gone wrong, how the sweet boy who once made me Mother's Day cards with crayon hearts had become this cold, status-obsessed stranger. But beneath the hurt and anger, another emotion began to surface. Determination. In all the years I'd spent raising Jacob, I had taught him to stand up for himself, to speak his truth, to never let anyone make him feel less than. It was time I followed my own advice. That night, I made a decision. I would attend my son's wedding, not to cause a scene or to embarrass him, but because a mother deserves to see her only child get married. And perhaps more importantly, because it was time for Jacob to learn the truth about who I really was. The next morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in over a decade. Then I drove to a storage facility on the outskirts of town, where I kept a small unit containing the few possessions I'd brought with me from my previous life. I hadn't opened it in years, had barely allowed myself to think about what it contained. The lock was stiff from disuse. Inside, covered in a light layer of dust, was a single filing cabinet and a garment bag. I opened the cabinet first, pulling out folders containing documents I hadn't looked at in decades. My law degree from Columbia University, my bar admission papers, newspaper clippings about cases I'd won, photos of me in court attire, standing outside impressive buildings with colleagues who had once respected me. Audrey Turner hadn't always been a cleaning lady. For 7 years, I had been a rising star at Morrison & Klein, one of New York's most prestigious law firms specializing in corporate law. I had been on track to become the youngest female partner in the firm's history. Until the Westwood case changed everything. Westwood Pharmaceuticals was one of the firm's biggest clients. During discovery for what should have been a routine lawsuit, I found evidence that the company had deliberately covered up serious side effects of a medication leading to several deaths. When I brought my concerns to the senior partners, I was told in no uncertain terms to bury the evidence. "This is how the game is played, Turner," my boss had said. "You want to make partner? Learn to be a team player." I faced an impossible choice: my career or my conscience. In the end, I couldn't live with myself if I stayed silent. I turned whistleblower, providing evidence to regulatory authorities and the plaintiff's attorneys. The backlash was swift and brutal. I was fired immediately. The firm used their considerable influence to blackball me throughout the legal community. No reputable law firm would touch me. I received threats had my character assassinated in legal circles. Adding to the chaos, I discovered I was pregnant with Jacob just weeks after losing my job. Mark, my boyfriend at the time, and Jacob's father initially stood by me. But as the months passed and my job prospects remained non-existent, as our savings dwindled and my pregnancy advanced, he grew increasingly resentful. One morning, when Jacob was just 2 months old, he left without warning, leaving only a brief note saying he couldn't live like this anymore. Rather than fight a battle I couldn't win, I made a radical decision. I walked away from the legal profession, entirely moved to a smaller town, and rebuilt my life from scratch, focusing solely on giving Jacob a stable, loving home. Cleaning houses wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work that paid the bills and allowed me to be present for my son. I never told Jacob about my past, partly to protect him from the pain and instability I'd experienced, and partly because I wanted him to value honesty and integrity above status and wealth. I had hoped those values would take root. Looking at the man he had become, I wondered if I had failed in the most important task of parenthood. As I stood in the storage unit surrounded by remnants of my former life, I made a decision. It was time for Jacob and the Blackwells to learn exactly who they were so casually dismissing. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to really look at my past. The filing cabinet contained more than just professional documents. There were photos of a younger me hairstyled in the professional bob that was popular in the early 90s, standing confidently outside courtrooms or at firm events. In one, I was shaking hands with a prominent judge after winning a complex securities case. In another, I was receiving an award for pro bono work from the New York State Bar Association. I had been someone before becoming Jacob's mother, someone accomplished, respected, ambitious, someone who had stood up for what was right, even at tremendous personal cost. I gathered the most important documents and photographs, placing them carefully in a leather portfolio I hadn't used in decades. Then I turned to the garment bag. Inside was the last power suit I had owned, a classic Navy Armani that had been a splurge when I made junior partner. I had kept it all these years, though I wasn't entirely sure why. Perhaps as a reminder of who I had been, or maybe because letting it go felt too final. I held it up against myself, wondering if it would still fit after all these years of physical labor. My body had changed. I was stronger in some ways, my hands more calloused, but I had maintained my figure through years of active work. Back at my apartment, I tried on the suit. It was a little loose in places, tight in others, but with minor alterations, it would work. I studied my reflection in the mirror, the silver threading through my dark hair, the fine lines around my eyes and mouth, the dignity in my posture that cleaning work hadn't erased. The woman looking back at me wasn't just a cleaning lady. She was a survivor, a mother, and once a damn good lawyer who had sacrificed her career for justice. That afternoon, I made a phone call I'd been avoiding for decades. My fingers trembled as I dialed a number I'd found through a quick internet search. Morrison and Klein, how may I direct your call? Elizabeth Klein, please. May I ask who's calling? I hesitated only briefly. Audrey Turner. Tell her it's about the Westwood case. There was a long pause before I was put on hold. 3 minutes later, a familiar voice came through the speaker. Audrey Turner. I thought you'd fallen off the face of the earth. Hello, Elizabeth. It's been a long time. Elizabeth Klein had been a first-year associate when I was forced out of the firm. She had sent me a sympathetic note afterward, the only person from my old life who had shown any support. In the intervening years, according to my research, she had risen to become name partner after Morrison's retirement. 25 years, give or take, she replied. What can I do for you, Audrey? I assume this isn't a social call. I took a deep breath. I need a favor. We arranged to meet the following day at a small cafe halfway between my town and New York City. Elizabeth arrived precisely on time, dressed in an impeccable suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent, her gray hair cut in a stylish bob. She looked exactly like the successful attorney she was. You look well, she said after we exchanged awkward greetings. Different, but well. Life takes unexpected turns, I replied. Over coffee, I explained my situation. Jacob's success, his engagement to Catherine Blackwell, his shame regarding my occupation, the wedding disinvitation. I told her everything except the most important part, saving that for last. So, your son is marrying into the Blackwell family, Elizabeth mused. Small world. We handle some of their legal affairs. I didn't know that, I said, genuinely surprised. The thing is, Elizabeth Jacob doesn't know about my past, about who I was before. Her eyebrows rose. You never told him you were an attorney, that you were on track to become the youngest female partner at M&K? I never told him any of it. After what happened after his father left, I wanted a clean slate. I wanted to raise him with different values than the ones I'd encountered in corporate law. Ironic that he ended up in exactly that world anyway, Elizabeth noted. I nodded sadly. And now he's ashamed of me, not knowing that I once occupied the same elite spaces he thinks are so important. So what exactly do you want from me, Audrey? I leaned forward. I'm going to attend my son's wedding, invited or not, and I want to do it as Audrey Turner, J.D., former rising star attorney who chose her conscience over her career. I need you to corroborate my story. Elizabeth studied me for a long moment. You know what you did with Westwood was ultimately vindicated. Years after you left, the full scope of their cover-up came to light. There were class action settlements, criminal charges against executives. You were right. I didn't know that, I admitted. The firm's official position never changed. You violated client confidentiality, end of story. But privately, many of us came to respect what you did. She paused. I became name partner partly by cleaning up the firm's ethical standards. We don't take clients like Westwood anymore. I felt a weight I hadn't even realized I was carrying lift slightly from my shoulders. Thank you for telling me that. So, you want to show up at this high society wedding and reveal your true identity, quite the dramatic entrance you're planning. I don't want to create a scene, I clarified. I just want to attend my only child's wedding with my dignity intact. And yes, I want Jacob and the Blackwells to know who I really am. Elizabeth considered this, then nodded decisively. I'll do better than just corroborate your story. I'll attend as your +1. You would do that? Why? She smiled, a hint of mischief in her eyes. Let's just say I've always regretted not standing up for you more forcefully back then, and I've dealt with the Blackwells enough to know they could use a lesson in humility. She reached into her purse and pulled out a business card. My private number. Let me know the details and I'll be there. As I left our meeting, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and exhilaration. For decades, I had buried Audrey the attorney beneath Audrey the cleaning lady. Now, for my son's sake, and perhaps for my own, it was time to reclaim that part of myself. The next few weeks were a flurry of preparations. I had the Armani suit tailored to fit my current frame. I visited a salon for the first time in years, having my hair styled into a sophisticated cut that framed my face more flatteringly than my usual practical ponytail. I found my old pearl earrings and necklace classic pieces that had been a gift from my parents when I passed the bar exam. I practiced walking with the confident posture I'd once had, naturally speaking with the articulate precision of my courtroom days, rather than the casual manner I'd adopted in my new life. Muscle memory was remarkable. Within days, I could feel my old professional persona emerging from dormancy. Jacob called twice during this period. The first time he awkwardly asked if I'd received a check he'd sent to buy something nice for yourself on the wedding day. The implication was clear: he was paying me off, salving his conscience with money. I told him I'd returned the check, which was true. His second call was more direct. Mom, please don't make this difficult, he pleaded. The guest list is final. Security has been instructed. It would be humiliating for everyone if you tried to come anyway. I raised you better than this, Jacob, I said quietly. This isn't about how you raised me, he snapped. This is about my future, my career, my life with Catherine. Why can't you understand that? I understand perfectly, I replied. But I think you're the one who's missing something important. What's that? He asked impatiently. That's for me to know, and you to find out, I said, channeling a phrase I'd often used when he was a curious child. Then I hung up my resolve stronger than ever. The day before the wedding, Elizabeth called to confirm our plans. She would pick me up at my apartment and we would drive together to the Blackwell estate in Greenwich. Are you nervous? She asked. Terrified, I admitted, but also certain. It's time Jacob knew the truth about me and about the values that really matter. For what it's worth, I think you're doing the right thing, Elizabeth said. And I'm looking forward to seeing Caroline Blackwell's face when she realizes she's been condescending to a Columbia law graduate who could have been her peer. That night, I barely slept. I laid out my outfit, packed my portfolio of evidence, and rehearsed what I might say to Jacob when I finally faced him. But in the quiet darkness of my apartment, doubts crept in. Was I doing this for Jacob or for myself? Was I trying to teach him a lesson or simply soothe my wounded pride? By morning, I had my answer. This wasn't about pride or revenge. This was about truth. The truth of who I was, the choices I had made, and the values I still believed in. Jacob deserved to know that part of his heritage, even if it changed nothing between us. As dawn broke on my son's wedding day, I stood at my window watching the sunrise, feeling more centered and purposeful than I had in years. Whatever happened at the Blackwell estate, I would face it as my complete self, Audrey Turner, mother cleaning lady, and former attorney who had once had the courage to stand up for what was right. Today, I would do it again. Elizabeth arrived at 9 in the morning, driving a sleek silver Mercedes that looked out of place in my modest apartment complex. She eyed my building with interest as I walked out to meet her. So, this is where you've been all these years, she remarked. It's not much, but it's home, I replied, smoothing the front of my navy suit nervously. You look perfect, Elizabeth assured me, taking in my appearance. Every inch the accomplished attorney you once were. The drive to Greenwich took just over an hour. Elizabeth filled the time with stories about former colleagues, updates on how the legal landscape had changed, and gentle questions about my life since leaving the profession. She didn't pry too deeply, seeming to understand that some parts of my journey were still too painful to discuss casually. As we approached the Blackwell estate, my anxiety mounted. The property was everything I had imagined. Sprawling, manicured grounds, a winding driveway lined with flowering trees, and a mansion that looked like it belonged in a historical documentary. Security guards checked vehicles at the entrance, consulting tablets with the approved guest list. "Elizabeth Klein plus guest," Elizabeth said confidently when we reached the checkpoint. The guard found her name, nodded, and waved us through without looking too closely at me. My first hurdle cleared. We parked among a collection of luxury vehicles that made Elizabeth's Mercedes look modest by comparison. As we walked toward the ceremony area, an elaborate setup of white chairs facing an ornate floral arch overlooking Long Island Sound, I clutched my small portfolio tightly, drawing strength from the evidence of my past life contained within. Guests were already gathering, the women in designer dresses and fascinator hats, the men in bespoke suits. Crystal champagne flutes glinted in the morning sunlight as servers circulated with trays. I recognized a few faces from photos I'd seen online. Prominent business leaders, a senator, even a minor European royal. "Quite the society wedding," Elizabeth murmured, accepting 2 champagne glasses from a passing server and handing one to me. "Drink up. You might need it." We found seats toward the back of the arrangement, deliberately positioning ourselves to be unobtrusive for the ceremony itself. I had no desire to disrupt Jacob's actual wedding vows. My confrontation could wait until the reception. As the string quartet began playing and guests settled into their seats, I scanned the crowd for familiar faces. I spotted Catherine's parents in the front row. Caroline Blackwell, resplendent in pale blue silk. Richard Blackwell, looking uncomfortable in his morning suit despite his obvious wealth. Then I saw him, Jacob, standing nervously at the altar alongside his groomsmen. My son, handsome in his tuxedo hair, perfectly styled, looking every inch the successful Wall Street prodigy he had become. My heart swelled with pride and ached with sadness simultaneously. How had we come to this moment where I was an uninvited guest at my own son's wedding? The ceremony proceeded with tasteful precision, Catherine floating down the aisle in a gown that probably cost more than my annual income, vows that sounded professionally written, a kiss that seemed practiced for optimal photographic appeal. I watched it all with a strange detachment, as if viewing a play rather than my son's actual wedding. When it concluded, guests were directed to a massive tent set up on the lawn for the reception, while the wedding party remained behind for photographs. Elizabeth and I moved with the crowd, accepting glasses of champagne and hors d'oeuvres that looked too artistic to eat. "When do you want to make your move?" Elizabeth asked quietly. I watched as the photographer directed Jacob and Catherine through various poses against the scenic backdrop. "Let him enjoy this part," I decided. "I'll wait until they come to the reception." We found our assigned table. Elizabeth's legitimate invitation had secured us spots at a table of distant acquaintances who didn't question my presence. For nearly an hour, we engaged in the kind of superficial small talk that dominates such events, with Elizabeth occasionally whispering information about particularly notable guests. Finally, the MC announced the entrance of the newlyweds. Jacob and Catherine swept into the tent to applause, looking radiant and untouchable in their wedding finery. They proceeded to their first dance, a choreographed affair that looked lovely, but lacked the spontaneous joy I would have wished for my son on his wedding day. As the formal dances concluded and guests began mingling more freely, I knew my moment had arrived. I took a deep breath, straightened my suit jacket, and nodded to Elizabeth. "I'm ready." We made our way toward the head table where Jacob and Catherine were accepting congratulations from a line of well-wishers. I positioned myself at the end of the line, Elizabeth beside me, offering silent support. As the queue advanced, I felt a surreal calm settle over me. All the anxiety, all the rehearsed speeches faded into a simple certainty: I was Jacob's mother, and I belonged at his wedding. When there were only 2 people ahead of me, Catherine's mother spotted me from across the tent. Her eyes widened in recognition, then narrowed with anger. She quickly moved toward us, intercepting me before I could reach Jacob. "Ms. Turner," she said in a low, controlled voice. "I believe there's been a misunderstanding. You aren't on the guest list." "Mrs. Blackwell," I replied with equal composure. "There's no misunderstanding. I'm here to attend my son's wedding." Her perfectly Botoxed face hardened. "We discussed this matter with Jacob and the decision was final. I'm going to have to ask you to leave before you cause a scene." Elizabeth stepped forward. "Is there a problem, Caroline?" Caroline Blackwell blinked momentarily, thrown by Elizabeth's familiar address. "Elizabeth Klein, what are you doing here with her? Supporting my former colleague," Elizabeth replied smoothly. "Audrey and I worked together at Morrison and Klein." Surely Jacob mentioned his mother's legal background. The confusion on Caroline's face would have been comical in another context. "Legal background," she repeated. "Mom?" I turned to find Jacob staring at me, his expression a mix of shock and dismay. Catherine stood beside him, clutching his arm, her perfect features arranged in a mask of polite confusion. "Hello, Jacob," I said calmly. "You look very handsome. Congratulations to you both." "What are you doing here?" he hissed, stepping closer to keep our conversation semi-private. "I told you not to come." "Yes, you did," I agreed. "But I decided that a mother has a right to see her only son get married." "Security." Caroline Blackwell called, her voice sharp enough to draw attention from nearby guests. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Elizabeth interjected smoothly. "Creating a scene by having a Columbia Law graduate and former junior partner at Morrison and Klein forcibly removed might make for awkward coverage in the society pages." Jacob's eyes widened. "What is she talking about, Mom?" I opened my portfolio and removed my law degree, handing it to him. "There's something I never told you, Jacob. Before you were born, I wasn't a cleaning lady. I was this." He stared at the document in disbelief. Catherine peered over his shoulder, her composure slipping. "Columbia Law School junior partner at Morrison and Klein, but that's one of the top firms in New York." "It is," Elizabeth confirmed. "And your mother-in-law was on track to become the youngest female partner in the firm's history before she left." By now, a small crowd had gathered around us, drawn by the tension and Caroline Blackwell's obvious distress. Richard Blackwell appeared at his wife's side, frowning deeply. "What's going on here?" he demanded. "Apparently," Catherine said slowly, "Jacob's mother used to be an attorney at Morrison and Klein." Richard Blackwell's eyebrows shot up. "Is that so? Our family has used M&K for years." He turned to Elizabeth. "You can vouch for this." "Absolutely," Elizabeth replied. "Audrey Turner was one of our most promising attorneys before she left the firm in 1990. In fact, she worked on several high-profile cases that set legal precedent still cited today." Jacob looked from the degree in his hands to my face, confusion evident. "I don't understand. If this is true, why have you been cleaning houses my entire life?" "That," I said quietly, "is a longer conversation. But the short version is that I made a choice between my career and my conscience. And then another choice between fighting to stay in a profession that had blackballed me or creating a stable, honest life for my newborn son." The silence that followed was profound. Jacob continued to stare at my law degree as if it might vanish if he looked away. Catherine's expression had shifted from confusion to calculation, reassessing me with this new information. The Blackwells stood frozen, clearly unsure how to proceed now that forcibly removing me would look considerably worse than they'd anticipated. "Well," Caroline finally said, her socialite training kicking in. "This is unexpected. Perhaps we should continue this discussion somewhere more private." "That won't be necessary," I replied. "I didn't come here to disrupt Jacob's wedding or to air old grievances. I came because a mother should see her son get married regardless of her occupation. I looked directly at Jacob. And because I wanted you to know the truth about who I am, all of who I am. Jacob swallowed hard. Why didn't you ever tell me? At first you were too young to understand. Later, I sighed. Later, I hoped you would judge people by their character, not their status or job title. I thought the lesson had taken root. Recent events suggested otherwise. The hurt in my voice must have penetrated because Jacob flinched visibly. Catherine placed a hand on his arm, surprisingly gentle. Jacob, she said softly, your mother should stay for the reception. He looked at her in surprise. You think so? Catherine nodded, her expression unreadable. Then she turned to me with a smile that seemed for the first time genuine. Ms. Turner, I apologize for the confusion. Of course you're welcome at our wedding. I wasn't naive enough to think Catherine's sudden change of heart was purely altruistic. Having a mother-in-law with a Columbia law degree and a former position at a prestigious firm was clearly preferable to a cleaning lady in her status-conscious world. But I appreciated the olive branch nonetheless. Thank you, Catherine, I said sincerely. Caroline Blackwell, reading the room with the political acumen of a lifelong socialite, quickly recovered her composure. Yes, absolutely. A misunderstanding. Richard, perhaps you could escort Ms. Turner and Ms. Klein to the champagne fountain. I believe the toast will be starting shortly. As Richard awkwardly guided us away, I caught a final glimpse of Jacob's face, still shocked, but with something else emerging beneath the surface. Something that looked remarkably like shame. Elizabeth squeezed my arm supportively as we moved through the crowd. Phase 1 accomplished, she murmured. Are you okay? I think so, I replied, feeling strangely light despite the emotional intensity of the confrontation. For the first time in decades, I feel whole. The rest of the reception passed in a blur of awkward introductions, curious glances, and whispered conversations that halted when I approached. I didn't mind. I hadn't come for social acceptance or to impress the elite crowd. I had come for Jacob, and in that, I had succeeded beyond my expectations. Near the end of the evening, as the band played a slow ballad and couples swayed on the dance floor, Jacob approached my table. He stood awkwardly for a moment, then gestured to the empty chair beside me. May I? I nodded, my heart racing with uncertainty about what would come next. So, he said after a long pause, Columbia Law. Class of 1983, I confirmed. And Morrison and Klein. Junior partner by 28. He shook his head, looking dazed. I had no idea. All these years. I'm still the same person, Jacob. The same mother who raised you, who loves you unconditionally. But you could have been... He trailed off, gesturing around at the wealthy, powerful guests. I could have been a lot of things, I agreed. But I chose to be your mother first, and I've never regretted that choice. His eyes finally met mine, and I saw a flicker of the thoughtful boy I'd raised. Why did you leave law? That's a conversation for another day, I said gently. Today is your wedding day. You should be dancing with your bride, not interrogating your mother about ancient history. Jacob nodded slowly. We should talk, though. Soon. I'd like that. He stood, hesitated, then leaned down and kissed my cheek. The first genuine affection he'd shown me in years. I'm sorry, Mom, for everything. I know, I said simply. Now go dance with Catherine. She keeps looking over here. As Jacob returned to his bride, Elizabeth rejoined me carrying 2 flutes of champagne. Mission accomplished. I accepted the champagne gratefully. A beginning, at least. We clinked glasses, two aging attorneys with very different life paths united in this strange moment of vindication and revelation. To truth, Elizabeth toasted. To truth, I echoed, watching my son lead his wife onto the dance floor. And to second chances. The day after the wedding, I expected to return to my normal life. Cleaning appointments, quiet evenings alone, the familiar rhythm that had defined my existence for decades. Instead, I awoke to multiple missed calls from Jacob and a text message asking when we could talk. We arranged to meet that afternoon at a small cafe halfway between Greenwich and my apartment. I arrived early, nervous, but resolved to be completely honest about everything, regardless of the consequences. Jacob arrived precisely on time, still looking tired from the wedding festivities, but more alert and present than I had seen him in years. He was dressed casually, jeans and a simple button-down rather than his usual expensive suits, and there was something different about his demeanor, a thoughtfulness that had been missing in recent interactions. "Hi, Mom," he said, giving me an awkward hug before sitting across from me. "Thanks for meeting me." "Of course," I replied, studying his face. "How does it feel to be married?" A small smile crossed his features. "Good. Different than I expected, but good." We ordered coffee and for a few minutes discussed harmless topics: the success of the wedding, the gifts they'd received, their honeymoon plans. But I could feel the weight of unspoken questions hanging between us, and eventually Jacob set down his cup decisively. "I need to understand, Mom, all of it. Why you kept your past a secret, why you left law, why you chose to clean houses instead of anything else you could have done with your education and experience." I took a deep breath. "It's a long story, Jacob, and not an entirely pleasant one." "I have time," he said simply. So I told him everything. The promising start to my career, the Westwood case, my discovery of their criminal negligence, the impossible ethical choice I had faced. I explained how I had chosen to become a whistleblower, knowing it would likely end my legal career, but unable to live with the alternative. "The firm fired me immediately," I continued. "They used their influence to ensure no other reputable firm would hire me. I was pregnant with you by then, and your father. Well, you know he left when you were just a baby." Jacob's expression had grown increasingly troubled as I spoke. "So you were blackballed for doing the right thing?" "Essentially, yes. Though according to Elizabeth years later, the truth about Westwood came out anyway. The executives faced criminal charges, there were massive settlements. I was vindicated, but by then I was long gone from that world." "But why didn't you fight Sue for wrongful termination?" "Something?" I smiled sadly. "I considered it, but I was a single mother with a newborn, no income, dwindling savings, and up against one of the most powerful law firms in the country. And more importantly, I was exhausted, Jacob. Morally, emotionally exhausted. I needed to focus on you, on creating a stable life where I could be present for you." "So you just gave up, became a cleaning lady?" "I didn't give up," I corrected gently. "I made a choice. Cleaning houses provided reliable income, flexible hours, so I could be there when you needed me, and honest work I could be proud of. Was it what I had envisioned for my life? No. But it allowed me to raise you in a stable, loving home. That seemed more important than status or prestige." Jacob was quiet for a long time, absently turning his coffee cup in circles. "Why didn't you tell me any of this when I was older, when I could understand?" This was the hardest question, the one I had been dreading. "At first, I thought I was protecting you from a painful history. Later, I suppose I was waiting for the right moment. And then as you grew older and started to become embarrassed by my work, I became afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid you would think I was a failure," I admitted. "That knowing I had once been successful and then lost everything would make you respect me even less than you already did. And perhaps more selfishly, I was afraid you would ask why I didn't fight harder to maintain the kind of life that might have made you proud of me." Jacob's eyes widened with a dawning realization. So yesterday, when you showed up at the wedding, I wanted you to know that I wasn't always just the cleaning lady you were ashamed to introduce to your friends, but more importantly, I wanted you to understand that the work I've done all these years has dignity and value regardless of my education or past career. He looked down, shame evident in his posture. I've been terrible to you. You've been influenced by a world that values the wrong things, I said gently. A world I tried to protect you from, perhaps mistakenly. Catherine was different after finding out, Jacob admitted. Suddenly, she wanted to know all about you, was talking about having you over for dinner, introducing you to her parents properly. He laughed without humor. Because a former Columbia-educated attorney is acceptable in their world, even if a cleaning lady isn't. And how do you feel about that? He met my eyes directly. Disgusted. With them, but mostly with myself. I've become exactly the kind of person you tried to teach me not to be, judging people by their status instead of their character. It's not too late to change that, I said softly. Jacob nodded slowly. No, it's not. He reached across the table and took my hand. I'm so sorry, Mom, for the way I've treated you, for being ashamed for the wedding, for all of it. You deserved better. I forgive you, I said simply because I did. Despite everything, he was still my son, and I could see glimpses of the thoughtful boy I had raised emerging from beneath the polished, status-conscious exterior he had adopted. I don't know how to fix this, he admitted. How to be the person I should have been all along. You start by remembering what really matters, I told him. Integrity, compassion, standing up for what's right even when it costs you something. I chose a simpler life because it allowed me to live by those values after the legal world tried to corrupt them. The question is, can you hold on to those values in the world you've chosen? Jacob was quiet for a long moment, considering my words. I need to try, he finally said. I'm not sure I can do it at Goldman, but I need to try. Our conversation continued for hours, delving deeper into my past, his present, and the values that had shaped both our lives. By the time we parted, something fundamental had shifted between us. The gulf of misunderstanding and shame that had separated us for years hadn't completely closed, but a bridge had begun to form across it. In the weeks that followed, Jacob made tentative efforts to reconnect in a more meaningful way. He called regularly, asked thoughtful questions about my life and work, and even invited me to dinner at the expensive apartment he shared with Catherine. To my surprise, Catherine was gracious and attentive, though I suspected her newfound appreciation for me had more to do with my former credentials than any genuine change of heart. More significantly, Jacob began questioning his own career choices. 6 months after the wedding, he called with news that stunned me. I quit Goldman, he announced without preamble. You what? I couldn't hide my shock. Jacob, why would you do that? Because I couldn't do it anymore, Mom. The constant focus on profit above all else. The ethical corners we were expected to cut the way, success was measured only in dollars and status. I kept hearing your voice in my head, asking if I was standing up for what I believed in. What will you do now? I asked, concerned about his future, but proud of his courage. I've accepted a position with the SEC, actually. Enforcement Division. Less money, but I'll be holding financial institutions accountable instead of helping them skirt regulations. He paused. Elizabeth Klein helped me get the interview. She said it was the least she could do for her former colleague's son. Tears welled in my eyes. I'm so proud of you, Jacob. I'm trying to be the person you raised me to be, he said quietly. It's harder than I thought. The worthwhile things usually are. Catherine, to my surprise, supported Jacob's career change, though it meant a significant lifestyle adjustment. When I visited them a month later, their massive apartment had been exchanged for a more modest place, and Catherine greeted me with news of her own transition. From her father's investment firm, to a nonprofit focused on financial literacy for underserved communities. "Your story inspired me," she admitted somewhat sheepishly as we prepared dinner together in their new kitchen. The idea that someone would give up everything for their principles? I'd never encountered that before. In my family, principles were always flexible when enough money was involved. The healing wasn't instantaneous or perfect. There were still awkward moments, still times when Jacob's ingrained status consciousness emerged, still occasions when I felt out of place in their world. But slowly, surely, our relationship deepened and strengthened in ways I had thought impossible just a year earlier. On the anniversary of their wedding, Jacob and Catherine invited me to dinner at their apartment. After dessert, Jacob handed me a small wrapped package. "What's this?" I asked, surprised. "Just open it," he urged. Inside was a beautiful silver frame containing a formal portrait from the wedding, Jacob and Catherine flanked by the Blackwells on one side and me on the other. I was surprised to see myself included in what was clearly the official family photo. "I had them edit it," Jacob explained. "You should have been in the original." I traced my finger over the image, emotion welling up inside me. "Thank you," I whispered. "There's something else," Jacob said, exchanging a glance with Catherine. He reached into his pocket and removed a small velvet box, placing it on the table before me. "This is long overdue." Inside was a delicate silver bracelet engraved with a simple message, "To Mom, my first teacher of courage and integrity." "I want you to know," Jacob said, his voice thick with emotion, "that I understand now. Why you made the choices you did. Why you chose cleaning over fighting to stay in law. You wanted me to learn that honest work has dignity, that integrity matters more than status." He swallowed hard. "It just took me too long to learn the lesson." "Not too long," I assured him, clasping the bracelet around my wrist. "Just the long way around." That night, driving back to my modest apartment, I reflected on the journey that had brought us to this point. The young attorney, I had been the cleaning lady. I became the mother I had always remained throughout. All facets of a life that had been challenging, sometimes heartbreaking, but ultimately worthwhile. I still cleaned houses for a living. I still took pride in transforming chaos into order in the honest work of my hands. But now I did so without the weight of secrecy, without the fear of judgment from the person who mattered most to me. As for Jacob, he was finding his own path to integrity in a world that often devalued it. It wasn't the life I had imagined for either of us all those years ago, but perhaps it was better, richer, in understanding, more honest, more fully lived. The lessons we learn the hard way are often the ones that transform us most deeply. For Jacob, it took nearly losing his mother to understand the true meaning of dignity and worth. For me, it took the courage to reclaim all parts of myself to stand in my complete truth before my son and the world. Some might see my life choices as a fall from grace, from respected attorney to cleaning lady. But I had come to understand it differently. Sometimes, the greatest act of courage is choosing a simpler path that allows you to live by your deepest values. Sometimes, true success isn't measured by titles or bank accounts, but by the integrity with which you've lived and the love you've both given and received. And sometimes the most powerful legacy you can leave isn't professional achievements or material wealth, but the quiet example of choosing right over easy, truth over convenience, and love over pride, even when it costs you everything. Have you ever had to choose between success and your principles? What would you have done in my situation? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe, and share it with someone who might need to be reminded that true worth isn't determined by job titles or social status. Thank you for joining me on this journey of healing and reconciliation. Remember, It's never too late to stand in your truth and reclaim your dignity.